The cold in Arkhangelsk was not a weather condition. It was a physical presence, a sentient entity that stalked the desolate grid of streets with the patient, predatory hunger of a wolf. It was an alpha predator of the cryosphere, its breath a visible, clinging fog that silvered every surface with a layer of crystalline frost, transforming the mundane architecture of the port into a brittle, alien sculpture garden. It hunted for the smallest vulnerabilities with a hunter's instinct. The microscopic gap between a glove's cuff and a jacket's sleeve, the exposed nape of a neck between collar and cap, the thin soles of a boot paused too long on the permafrost-infused concrete. When it found a weakness, it sank its teeth of ice into flesh and bone with a paralytic, silent efficiency. For Alec Thorne, codename Kestrel, the cold was an old and respected adversary. It did not blunt the senses. It honed them to a razor's edge, stripping away the superfluous and leaving only the stark, immediate, and brutal reality of the mission. He was folded into the driver's seat of a ZIL 130 cargo truck, a rust-streaked, olive-drab relic of the Soviet military-industrial complex. Its six-cylinder, 6.0-liter inline-six engine, a carbureted behemoth designed for simplicity and survival, grumbled a low, uneven protest against the -32 air, the exhaust pluming behind it like the breath of a dragon. The cabin was a cramped, metallic cell of layered odors, a pungent archaeology of its long, hard life. The decades of cheap, acrid Bellamorcanal papyrusy cigarettes ground into the floor mats, their cardboard mouthpieces like fossilized remains, the faint, sickly sweetness of leaking antifreeze, the sharp chemical tang of vinyl seats cracked and split by countless cycles of freezing and thawing. And beneath it all, the lingering metallic scent of human fear, his own, tightly coiled and leashed like a guard dog. The condensation of his own breath bloomed and receded rhythmically across the grimy windshield, a translucent curtain parting to reveal the sodium-yellow glare of the port's high-mast lighting. The lamps, buzzing audibly in the profound silence, cast long, distorted shadows from stacks of shipping containers, turning the industrial yard into a mausoleum of frozen global trade, a silent monument to supply chains shattered by geopolitics and ice. His focus, narrowed by years of training and the frigid imperative of the night, was fixed on a single, flickering point of light. It was a naked bulb, anemic and yellow, in a third-story window of a dilapidated brick warehouse, a skeletal survivor of some long-forgotten 5-year plan whose crumbling mortar wept icicles. That light was a beacon, a signal, and the locus of his entire purpose on this frozen edge of the civilized world. It represented his target, his asset, and the delicate fulcrum upon which the balance of global power was about to teeter. The mission, codenamed Operation Falling Star, in the hushed, climate-controlled sub-basements of Vauxhall Cross, was audacious in its scope and terrifying in its implications. The objective was stark: to prevent the Russian Federation from placing a weapon in low Earth orbit capable of decapitating the West's entire satellite infrastructure in a single, silent, untraceable sweep. The weapon's official designation was Zarya 17, or Dawn 17, a piece of poetic, almost cynical misdirection for a tool of absolute darkness. MI6 analysts, in their typically gallows humor, had given it a more fitting name: the Guillotine. It was a hunter-killer satellite, a technological apex predator designed to operate in the cold vacuum of space. Armed with a suite of directed energy weapons, plasma cutters, and high-tensile grappling systems, it was a wolf designed to prowl the silent, black pastures of orbit and cull the flock of GPS, communication, and surveillance satellites upon which the entire edifice of modern civilization was built. Its launch, aboard a Soyuz 2 rocket, was scheduled in precisely 76 hours from the Plesetsk Cosmodrome, a few hundred kilometers south of where Alec now sat, his blood thickening in his veins as he waited. A subtle triple chirp, a sound pitched to be felt as a vibration in the mastoid bone as much as heard, emanated from deep within his ear canal. The earpiece was a marvel of miniaturization from Q Branch, a custom-molded sliver of silicon and rare earth magnets no larger than a grain of rice. Broadcasting on a scrambled, frequency-hopping channel centered around 433.92 megahertz, an unlicensed ISM band chosen for its chaotic background noise, making it a whisper in a hurricane of static. The voice that followed was female, calm, and possessed a chilling absence of warmth, like a voice synthesized from pure data. It was Hera, his handler, his digital ghost in the machine, piped in from a soundproofed, lead-lined room in London, where the temperature never varied and the coffee was always fresh. Kestrel, we have movement. 2 UAZ Patriots, standard FSB markings, are executing a systematic sweep of the port district, grid by grid. Based on their current vector and speed, their estimated time of arrival to your position is 7 minutes. What is the status of the package? Negative, Hera, Alec murmured, his voice a low vibration that barely disturbed the stale air in the cab. He kept his Steiner T-Series 8x30 binoculars steady on the window, the rubber eye cups cold and unyielding against the skin around his eyes. Our friend is late. The light is still on. Unacceptable, she replied. The single word was delivered with the flat, unassailable finality of a death certificate. It carried the weight of a 1,000-page threat assessment, of contingency plans branching into infinity, of a king's ransom in resources and political capital. The window is closing, Kestrel. The device must be in his hands tonight. Abort is not an option. The device. It rested beneath his seat in a thermally shielded, shock-absorbent Pelican 1120 case. It was a masterpiece of quiet sabotage, the physical manifestation of a nation's cunning. It was not a bomb. A bomb was a blunt instrument, crude, obvious, an overt act of war. This was something far more elegant, more insidious, a poison pill wrapped in a perfect disguise. It was a replacement gyroscopic actuator for the Soyuz 2 rocket's inertial guidance platform. To any inspector, any diagnostic scan, it was a perfect factory-spec replica, identical down to the laser-etched Cyrillic serial numbers and the faint sheen of packing grease. Internally, however, its core was a marvel of malicious engineering. A tiny, diamond-hard silicon nitride bearing at the heart of the gyroscope had been ground infinitesimally off-center, a deliberate flaw measured in microns, a whisper of imperfection in a symphony of precision. This imperfection was undetectable by any standard pre-flight diagnostic. But under the immense G-forces and punishing vibrations of a rocket launch, that microscopic imbalance would introduce a cumulative error, a phantom drift of 0.001 degrees per second. The rocket's sophisticated brain would believe it was flying straight and true, a perfect ascent, while in reality it would be describing a slow, graceful, and utterly fatal arc. By the time it reached maximum dynamic pressure, the point of most extreme aerodynamic stress, the angle of attack would be so severe that the atmosphere itself would tear the vehicle apart. It would be a tragedy, a catastrophic but entirely plausible failure of Russian engineering, a national humiliation. And for MI6, it would be the clean, untraceable victory that plausible deniability was built upon. "He's scared," Alex said, his gaze unwavering from the flickering bulb. Morozov is turning the screws on the entire Plesetsk staff. Colonel Ivan Morozov, Federal Security Service. The name alone was enough to chill the blood of any operative working the Northern District. He was the boogeyman of the Cosmodrome, a throwback to the brutal efficiency of the third chief directorate of the KGB. Morozov saw spies in every shadow and traitors in every cafeteria queue. As head of counterintelligence for the Northern Fleet and the Plesetsk facility, he was the guardian at the gate. And for the last month, he had been a phantom menace, his unseen presence breathing down the neck of their meticulously planned operation. Fear is a tool, Kestrel. We calibrated his fear with surgical precision. Hera's voice was a scalpel, dissecting emotion down to raw data. We placed his patriotism on one side of the scale and his daughter's life on the other. The numbers were clear. The outcome was never in doubt. The numbers. Alex suppressed a grimace. He hated the cold, hard calculus of their profession. Dmitry Volkov, the asset, was a senior guidance technician at Plesetsk, a man with the highest level access to the rocket's delicate heart. He was a widower, a quiet patriot, and utterly unremarkable except for one devastating fact. His 12-year-old daughter, Anya, was dying. A rare genetic disorder, fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva, was methodically turning her soft tissues to bone, dissolving her from the inside out. There was one hope, an experimental form of gene therapy available only at a private clinic in Zurich, with a price tag that might as well have been the moon. MI6, through a labyrinth of shell corporations and philanthropic fronts, had made a quiet donation to that clinic, creating a charitable grant for a promising young Russian patient. The first payment, covering her transport and admission, had been processed yesterday. The second, the one that would pay for the life-saving treatment itself, was contingent on the successful delivery and installation of their little gift. It was the filthiest, most effective form of leverage there was. Hope, weaponized. The light in the warehouse window blinked twice, held for a second, and then went dark. The signal. "Package is live," Alec whispered into the silence. "I'm moving." He didn't slam the truck door. He eased it open until the latch disengaged with a faint metallic pop, then pushed it shut with a soft click that was swallowed by the groaning engine and the sighing wind. He moved like a fluid shadow, melting between stacks of shipping containers caked with ice and rust that flaked away under his gloved fingers. The air was so cold, it felt like breathing microscopic shards of glass. A searing pain deep in his lungs with every inhalation. Every crunch of his boots on the frozen, salt-strewn gravel sounded like a gunshot in the profound, waiting silence of the port. He moved with a practiced economy of motion, a wraith in this industrial graveyard, his Glock 26 a cold, dense weight in its concealed holster against the small of his back. He had chosen the subcompact 9mm for its concealability and the near-universal availability of its ammunition. A last resort he prayed he wouldn't need. He rounded the corner of a massive, blood-red Maersk container and saw him. Dmitry Volkov stood shivering, and not entirely from the cold. He was huddled in the lee of the container, a small, bird-like man swallowed by a thick, dark coat. His face, illuminated by the distant, jaundiced glow of the lights, was a pale, gaunt mask of pure terror, his breath coming in ragged, visible plumes. "You are late," Alex said, his Russian flawless, unaccented, the words emerging as puffs of white vapor. It was not an accusation, merely a statement of fact to establish control. Dmitry flinched as if struck, his eyes wide and darting, scanning the shadows behind Alec. "They are everywhere. Morozov's men. They pulled my entire team in for routine questioning this afternoon. Hours of it. They looked at my hands, my face. They know something. I can feel it. His voice was a ragged, trembling whisper, cracking with strain. They know nothing, Alec countered, his tone firm, a carefully modulated frequency of reassurance. He was a salesman of confidence, and this man was his most important customer. It's pre-launch paranoia, standard procedure for a high-value payload. Did you bring the schematics? Dmitri nodded jerkily, fumbling inside his coat with hands that trembled so violently he could barely grasp the zipper. He produced a rolled-up cylinder of paper. Alec took it, his gloved fingers brushing against the man's icy skin. He unrolled it slightly. It was a detailed engineering diagram of the Soyuz 2 upper-stage avionics bay. He had seen a dozen versions of this from satellite intercepts and GCHQ hacks. But this was the real thing, the as-built drawing, annotated by hand with the latest undocumented modifications. A goldmine of intelligence. Good, Alex said. He reached down and retrieved the shielded case. It felt heavy, dense, far more so than its size would suggest. It was the weight of a nation's ambition, the anchor that would drag a star from the sky. This is the replacement unit, the Calibrator 7. It is identical to the one currently installed. The diagnostic sweep will show a perfect match. You know the installation procedure. Dmitri stared at the case as if it were a venomous snake coiled to strike. I cannot do this. They watch us. Every step. The gantry cleanroom is monitored. The access logs are checked and double-checked by Morozov's people themselves. The service gantry. Level 4. During the final cryogenic fuel load. Alex said, his voice dropping to a hypnotic, conspiratorial whisper. He was reciting the plan back to its author, reinforcing the logic they had built together over weeks of clandestine communication. There is a 20-minute window. When they begin pumping the supercooled liquid oxygen, the non-essential sensor feeds on that level are disabled to prevent electrical shorts from the extreme condensation. We know this, Dmitri. We know this because you are the one who told us. Your access code is valid for that entire sector. But if I am caught, Dmitri's voice was a ragged plea. You will not be caught. Alec cut him off, his voice hardening, the velvet glove stripped away to reveal the iron fist. You will walk in. You will swap the component. You will seal the bay and walk out. You will sign the log, citing a routine pre-fueling vibration check. Your daughter is in Zurich, Dmitri. She is comfortable. She is safe. She is waiting for you. This is the only way. He pushed the case into Dmitri's hands. The man juggled it, almost dropping the 15-million-pound device onto the frozen ground. A distant siren began to wail, a mournful two-tone cry that echoed and refracted across the frozen geometry of the port. The FSB sweep was getting closer, a tightening dragnet. Go, Alec commanded, his voice ablade. Do not contact us again. Do not deviate. The funds will be transferred to the clinic's escrow account 60 seconds after we confirm payload loss on ascent. Go now. Dmitri hesitated for a single, agonizing heartbeat, his face a canvas of anguish, fear, and a desperate paternal love. Then he turned and scuttled away into the darkness, clutching the case to his chest like a cursed religious relic, the price of his soul. Alec didn't watch him leave. He was already moving, his internal clock counting down the seconds until the UAZ Patriots would round the corner. He flowed back through the shadows, his mind a whirlwind of calculations and branching contingencies. The first part was done. Now came the infinitely more complex, infinitely more dangerous part. Waiting for a desperate, terrified man to hold his nerve against the full weight of his conscience and his country. Back in the groaning warmth of the Zill's cab, he keyed his earpiece. "Hera, the Eagle has passed the Falcon." The prearranged code phrase. "Understood, Kestrel. The FSB vehicles are 2 blocks from your position and accelerating. Exfiltrate. Now." He didn't need telling twice. He turned the key, and the old engine coughed, sputtered, and roared to life. He pulled out of the container yard, heading east, away from the sweep. Just another anonymous truck driver on a lonely, forgotten northern road. But inside, his heart was a cold, hard knot in his chest. He had just handed a man a tool to betray his country and a death sentence if he failed. And the fate of the next war, the silent, invisible war in the heavens, now rested entirely on that man's shaking hands. The next 2 days were a masterclass in controlled tension, a slow-motion descent into the nerve-shredding purgatory of waiting. Alec relocated to a prearranged safe house, a small, forgettable dacha 30 kilometers outside the Cosmodrome's formal exclusion zone. From the outside, it was a hunter's cabin, complete with neatly stacked firewood and a rusty Lada Niva parked under a faded canvas tarp. Inside, it was a hermetically sealed nerve center. The rough-hewn log walls were lined with state-of-the-art signal-dampening foam. The main room, smelling of damp wood, ozone, and hot electronics, was dominated by a suite of encrypted communication gear, signals intelligence receivers, and monitors displaying intercepted telemetry and real-time satellite imagery of Plesetsk. He lived on black coffee, protein bars, and a steady drip of pure adrenaline, sleeping in 90-minute cycles, the Glock always within arm's reach on the console beside him. His only company was the wind, whistling through the pines, and Hera's disembodied voice. She was his constant digital companion, a stream of pure information from a parallel universe of clean data and absolute certainty. She fed him a constant flow of intelligence, filtered and analyzed by the vast apparatus of MI6 and GCHQ. Colonel Morozov had indeed intensified his investigation. He'd placed 2 of the senior guidance technicians on indefinite administrative leave, citing vague protocol violations. He was sniffing around the edges of the truth, a bloodhound catching a scent he couldn't yet identify, but knew was alien to the sterile environment of the Cosmodrome. "He's running out of time, so he's becoming clumsy," Hera analyzed, her voice crisp over the encrypted link. "He's shaking the tree, hoping something falls out. It's a brute force approach, but it's making our asset nervous." "Define nervous," Alec asked, his eyes fixed on a high-resolution thermal image of the Plesetsk launch complex. The Soyuz rocket stood on Pad 43, a slender white needle against the monochromatic gray landscape, venting ghostly plumes of cryogenic vapor. It looked serene, peaceful, a sleeping giant. He accessed the encrypted communication channel twice last night. Both times, he initiated the handshake protocol, then aborted before sending a message. He's panicking. He wants reassurance. "Can we give it to him?" Alec asked, already knowing the answer. "Negative. Unnecessary risk. All communication from our side is terminated. He knows the stakes. The carrot and the stick are both firmly in place. He will perform to specifications." Alec wasn't so sure. He had looked into Dmitry Volkov's eyes. He had seen not just fear, but a profound, soul-deep terror that went beyond the rational fear of capture. This wasn't a professional agent or a hardened ideologue driven by belief. He was a civilian, an engineer, a father pushed to the absolute limit of human endurance. Men like that were unpredictable. They were brittle. They could break. He spent an hour field stripping and cleaning his Glock. The familiar, methodical process of oiling the slide and checking the spring, a small island of mechanical certainty in a sea of human variables. Launch day arrived with a bruised purple dawn that did little to warm the frozen landscape. T-minus 8 hours. The final preparations were underway. Alec watched through a powerful telescopic lens as the service gantry, a colossal skeletal steel spider, embraced the rocket. He could see tiny figures in white clean suits moving with methodical precision around its base, priests attending to their idol before its fiery ascension. "Hera, confirm the fueling window," he said, his voice tight, the coffee turning to acid in his stomach. "Confirmed. Cryogenic loading of the block I upper stage begins in 45 minutes. Sensor blackout window is green. It's his time to shine, Kestrel." Alec's focus shifted from the visual feed to his signals intelligence rig. He had managed to place a high-risk tap into the Cosmodrome's internal fiber-optic communications network, a gambit that could get him killed if discovered. He wasn't listening for words, but for data packets, a river of information flowing past his screen. He was watching for one specific sequence: Dmitry Volkov's unique alphanumeric access code pinging the security server for the avionics bay on level 4 of the gantry. The minutes crawled by, each one a small eternity. The fueling began. Alec could see a sheath of ice forming on the rocket's skin as supercooled liquid oxygen and kerosene were pumped into its cavernous tanks. The internal comms chatter, translated and displayed as text on his screen, was a storm of technical jargon, checklists, and confirmations. Then he saw it. A single line of code scrolled past, highlighted in amber by his search algorithm. Access granted. User D. Volkov. Sector 7, G Level 4, Avionics Bay. "He's in," Alec breathed, a strange mix of relief and dread washing over him. "Hera, he's in the bay." "Acknowledged, Kestrel. The clock is running. 20 minutes. Now, Alec was blind. The sensor feeds from level 4 were down, just as planned. For the next 20 minutes, Dmitry Volkov was in a ghost world, a small, sealed room high up on the gantry, alone with his conscience and a small piece of exquisitely engineered treason. Alec could only imagine the scene. The low hum of the electronics, the smell of ozone and filtered air, the bitter cold seeping through the metal walls. Dmitry, his fingers numb and clumsy inside the clean suit gloves, fumbling with the locking bolts on the guidance platform's housing. His heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Every stray clang of metal or hiss of venting gas from the gantry outside making him jump. On Alec's primary monitor, a new window popped up, flagged with the highest priority. It was a direct feed from a GCHQ Signals intelligence satellite, a fictional Magpie 4, parked in a geosynchronous orbit high above the Russian Federation. It was listening for one thing only: high-priority, heavily encrypted FSB transmissions originating from the Plesetsk facility. It was a silent digital alarm bell. 5 minutes passed. 10, 15. "This is taking too long," Alec muttered, rubbing his tired eyes. "The swap is a 5-minute job. 7 if he's being meticulous. What is he doing in there?" "He's under immense pressure, Kestrel. Give him the time," Hera advised. But for the first time since the operation began, Alec detected a faint, almost imperceptible tremor of uncertainty in her synthesized voice. At the 18-minute mark, the access log on his SIGINT feed pinged again. Access terminated. User D. Volkov. Sector 7, G Level 4. A collective sigh of relief, unspoken but deeply felt, passed across the thousands of miles between London and the lonely Dasha. "He's out," Alec said, the tension in his shoulders easing by a fraction. "The package is delivered." "Stand by to confirm, Kestrel," Hera said. We're waiting for the diagnostic reboot of the guidance platform. If he did it right, the system will come back online and report all nominal. The seconds ticked by. 1 minute, 2. The diagnostic reboot should have been instantaneous. The line on the telemetry feed remained flat. Hera, what's happening? Why isn't it coming back online? We don't know. The system is still offline. Stand by. Then, the GCHQ window flashed a stark, screaming red. A priority burst transmission, wrapped in multiple layers of military-grade encryption, was being broadcast from Colonel Morozov's office directly to FSB headquarters at the Lubyanka in Moscow. "Oh, God," Alec whispered, the floor seeming to drop out from under him. He's been caught. The internal comms network exploded into chaos. Voices were shouting in Russian. Security alerts blared with electronic urgency. The calm, methodical process of the countdown had shattered into a million pieces of panicked confusion. "Kestrel, we have a catastrophic compromise." Hera's voice was pure ice, all trace of uncertainty gone, replaced by a terrible clarity. "Morozov has locked down the entire facility. He's found the device. Repeat, the device is compromised." Alec's blood ran cold. This was the absolute worst-case scenario. Not only would the launch be scrubbed, but the actuator, their priceless piece of sabotage technology, would be in the hands of the FSB's top engineers. Their methods, their microscopic flaws, their entire operational philosophy exposed. The plausible deniability was gone, vaporized, replaced by irrefutable proof of British state-sponsored sabotage. "What about the asset?" Alec asked, his mind already cycling through the emergency exfiltration protocols. "The asset is a ghost. Forget him. He's gone. Your exfiltration protocol is now active. Burn everything. Thermite charges on all equipment. Move to extraction point Bravo. A chopper will be waiting 1 click across the Finnish border. You have 90 minutes. But Alec wasn't moving. He was staring at the telemetry screen, at the main countdown clock. The Russians weren't scrubbing the launch. The fueling process was continuing. The gantry was still in place, but the flurry of panicked activity had died down, replaced by an eerie, focused calm. "Hera, they're not stopping the count," he said, a strange, cold, and terrifying realization dawning on him. "Why in God's name aren't they stopping the count?" "We don't know," she said, the confusion in her voice now palpable. "It makes no sense. They have the compromised component. They know the guidance system is faulty. This is illogical. Unless they didn't." Alec's mind raced, a supercomputer running through 1,000 permutations. Dmitri took too long. The diagnostic didn't come back online. Morozov was alerted. But what if Morozov didn't find the device? What if he found Dmitri? What if Morozov and his security team stormed the avionics bay and found the technician pale and sweating, having just finished the job, the original component still in his pocket? "He didn't find the device," Alec said aloud, the theory crystallizing in his mind. "He found the man. Morozov would have arrested him on the spot, dragged him to a sterile interrogation room deep in the bowels of the complex. And a man like Dmitri Volkov, a civilian academic, would break. He would break fast, and he would break completely. He would tell them everything. He would tell them he swapped a component. He would tell them the new one was designed to destroy the rocket. And what would a man like Colonel Ivan Morozov do with that information? A man from the old school, a man steeped in the brutal, paranoid, face-saving logic of the KGB. He wouldn't just scrub the launch. That would be a public admission of failure. An admission that foreign intelligence had penetrated his impenetrable fortress. It would be a catastrophic stain on his career, on Russia's pride. No. He would do something else. Something audacious and insane. He would force the terrified technician to tell him exactly which component he swapped. He would send his own trusted engineer, under armed guard, back to the gantry, and he would have them swap it back. "Hera," Alex said, his voice urgent, electric. "He's swapping it back. Morozov is putting the original factory-spec actuator back in. He's going to launch the rocket successfully to prove his security is flawless, and then bury Volkov so deep, no one will ever find him." A stunned silence came from the earpiece. The sheer high-stakes arrogance of it was breathtaking. Morozov was playing a game of nuclear chicken with a 100-ton missile to save his own skin. "If that's true, Kestrel," Hera said slowly, the gears of analysis turning in London, "then our mission is a complete failure." Alec looked at the launch clock. T-minus 30 minutes. He thought about the device he'd given Dmitri, the Calibrator 7. He remembered the endless technical briefings from the wizards in Q Branch, the specifications, the fail-safes, and one particular detail, a feature they called the ablative fail-safe, a last resort that the operational plan never intended to use. The shielded Pelican case Dmitri had carried was not just a container, it was a microcharger. The actuator had a tiny, sophisticated capacitor at its core. As long as it was secured in the case, it was being fed a minuscule trickle of power, keeping the capacitor topped up. Once removed from that field, a timer started, a 60-minute timer. If the actuator was not installed and drawing power from the rocket's own systems within that time, the capacitor would discharge its entire load into the delicate crystal lattice of the gyroscope's core, shattering it from the inside out. It would be rendered completely, inertly useless. It was a feature designed to prevent the technology from falling into enemy hands if a dead drop went wrong or an agent was compromised. Dmitri had been in the bay for 18 minutes. He'd been with Morozov for at least 10 more. The clock was ticking. If they were swapping it back now, they were reinstalling the original part. But what had they done with his? "Hera," Alex said, a grim, razor-thin smile touching his lips for the first time in days. The mission might not be a failure yet. What was the designation of the original factory-spec actuator? "Standby. Records show it's a Calibrator 6. Standard issue for this Soyuz model. And the one we supplied? A Calibrator 7. Alec grabbed the schematic Dmitri had given him, spreading the crinkled paper across his console. The annotated diagram. His eyes scanned the power couplings for the inertial platform. And there it was, a tiny, handwritten note in Russian next to the actuator's power socket, an annotation so small he'd almost missed it. Note: K7 model requires polarity reversal on power input. Check jumper pins 3 and 4. It was a recent modification to the new batch of rockets, a detail MI6's satellite intercepts and electronic eavesdropping had missed. A detail only an insider, a hands-on technician like Dmitri, would know. Dmitri would have known to reverse the polarity. He would have set the jumper pins correctly for the Calibrator 7 before installing it. But Morozov's engineer sent in a frantic rush to reinstall the original Calibrator 6. Would he know that? Or would he just assume the settings were correct for the standard part and slam the old unit back in? And what happens when you install a Calibrator 6, which expects a standard current, into a socket that has been repinned for a reversed polarity? You connect the positive lead to the negative terminal and the negative to the positive. You create a dead short across the entire system. It wouldn't cause an explosion on the pad, but it would irreversibly fry the guidance platform's delicate motherboard. It would cripple the rocket's brain. The rocket would launch, but it would be flying utterly blind. Without the constant 1,000 times a second corrections from the gyroscopes, it would be an inherently unstable 100-ton bomb. It would fly for a few seconds on pure thrust, and then it would tumble out of control. "Hera," Alex said, his voice electric with a terrifying, triumphant tension. "Get me a real-time diagnostic of the upper stage power bus, now." Seconds later, a new graph appeared on his screen. It should have been showing a steady trickle of power. Instead, it was a flat line. 0. "The inertial platform is offline," Hera stated, her voice tight with a dawning, horrified disbelief. "It's drawing no power. My God, Kestrel. They're launching blind." Morozov, in his arrogant, desperate rush to cover up a security breach, was about to cause a far greater, far more public disaster than MI6 had ever intended. He thought he was reinstalling a working part, but he was reinstalling it into a sabotaged socket. It was Dmitri's final, unwitting act of betrayal. The countdown reached its final, inexorable minutes. The massive service gantry pulled away from the rocket with hydraulic grace. The world held its breath. 10, 9, 8. The voice of Russian mission control was calm, steady, and utterly oblivious. A dead man walking. Alex stood, his eyes glued to the telescopic view, the image so clear he could see the ice cracking on the rocket's skin. 3, 2, 1. Liftoff. A torrent of incandescent fire and smoke erupted from the base of the Soyuz. For a moment, a glorious, perfect moment, it rose majestically, a spear of white and orange against the dark purple sky. It looked like a flawless launch. Morozov, watching from his command bunker, must have been swelling with pride, with relief, with victory. But Alec was watching the telemetry, the deviation indicators, the data streams that should have been flickering madly as the gyros and flight computers corrected the flight path. Were dead. Zeros across the board. At about 15 seconds into the flight, it began. A slight wobble. A tiny, almost imperceptible yaw to the left. Without a working guidance system to command the gimbaled engines to correct it, the wobble grew exponentially. The rocket, now under the immense pressure of the thickening atmosphere, started to cartwheel. "We have anomalous trajectory," someone screamed over the now chaotic comms network. "Loss of control. Flight termination system engaged. Abort! Abort!" But it was far too late. The immense aerodynamic forces on the airframe were too much for it to bear. The rocket buckled in the middle, then broke apart. And then the entire volatile load of supercooled fuel and oxidizer detonated in a single, colossal, sun-bright fireball. It was not a quiet failure in the upper atmosphere. It was a titanic explosion, 10,000 feet above the cosmodrome, that momentarily turned night into day. A rain of flaming debris began to fall across the frozen taiga. It was a disaster of unimaginable proportions, visible for 100 kilometers. It was a failure so spectacular, so public, so profoundly humiliating, that no cover-up would ever be possible. Alec watched the fireball bloom and fade, a new, terrible star in the Russian sky. He had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams, and it was a complete and utter accident. "Exfiltrate, Kestrel." Hera's voice was a sharp, insistent command, pulling him from his reverie. "That is a direct order. Go, now." He didn't need to be told. He smashed the emergency button on his console. Thermite charges embedded in his equipment flared with incandescent heat, melting the sensitive electronics and classified hard drives into a useless molten slag. He grabbed his go bag, checked the action on his Glock, and slipped out of the dacha into the gray, frozen morning. The echoes of the explosion still seemed to hang in the vibrating air. Hours later, he was a passenger in a rattling lorry, being driven towards the Finnish border by a taciturn local contact from the SVR dissident network. His mind was a maelstrom. He thought of Dmitry Volkov, sitting in a windowless FSB interrogation cell. He wouldn't last the day. Morozov, his career and his country's prestige in ashes, would take all his rage and humiliation out on the terrified technician who had been the cause of it all. As they drove through the endless, silent forest, Alec's secure satellite phone buzzed with a specific, encrypted tone. It was Hera. "One final detail, Kestrel. For your after-action report," she said, her voice as flat and neutral as a dial tone. "Go ahead," he replied, his voice equally flat. "The money. The final payment for Volkov's daughter. We were monitoring the clinic's escrow accounts, as per protocol." "And?" Alec asked, a single stupid sliver of hope piercing his professional cynicism. At least the girl would live. At least something good would come of this wreckage. 30 seconds after payload loss was confirmed by NORAD, the transfer was initiated from our offshore holding account, and 60 seconds after that, the entire sum was seized by the Swiss authorities. Alec felt the air leave his lungs in a silent rush. What? On what grounds? An anonymous tip was made to their financial crimes unit. Detailed information about the funds being the proceeds of state-sponsored industrial espionage. The tip included account numbers, transfer times, routing information, everything they would need. The funds are now frozen indefinitely, pending an investigation that will, of course, last for years. Alec was silent for a long time, watching the snow-laden pines flash past the window in a hypnotic white and green blur. "Who made the tip, Hera?" he finally asked, though he already knew the answer. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach, a cold, hard certainty. "The source was untraceable, of course," she said, the clinical detachment in her voice more damning than any confession. "But the calculus is simple. The mission is over. The asset is a loose end. A dead man's daughter with a 9-figure bank account would attract unwanted attention from journalists, from other intelligence services. Questions would be asked. Trails might be found. This way is cleaner. It cauterizes the wound. It leaves no trail. It was the logical final move. The logical final move. He felt a coldness spread through his bones that had nothing to do with the Arctic air seeping through the Lada's door seals. They had used it all. The man's love, his fear, his hope. They had calibrated it, weaponized it, and squeezed him dry. And when he was nothing but an empty husk, they had thrown him away and meticulously erased even the reason for his sacrifice. He ended the call without another word, the silence in the car pressing in on him. He had won. MI6 had won. The West was safe from the guillotine. Operation Falling Star was a resounding, spectacular success. But as he looked out at the endless, unforgiving white landscape, he felt no victory. Only the profound, soul-crushing chill of the business he was